that we have, but again, please submit your questions through the chat window. So let's get started today, and I just wanted to give a further introduction on our speakers today. So first of all, Antonio Estevez with Door3 has joined us. He's a Drupal architect and has worked in web development for over 11 years with a focus on Drupal for at least the last 5 years. And he definitely has a lot of experience integrating rich interactive experiences with technology. Some of that technology ranging from 3D multiple user rooms to complex e-commerce shopping and fulfillment systems. So we're really excited to hear from Antonio today. We're also joined, Tumani Tundawani from Pantheon has joined us as well. He's a customer success manager. He has worked at Pantheon for 2.5 years. Before that, he owned his own company and focused on web development, and has about 8 years of Drupal experience. Something that he finds really exciting is working and seeing high-performance websites and well-written code. To help answer questions throughout the webinar, Garrett Veeder of Door3 is also joining us. Garrett is Door3's Senior Marketing Manager. He has over 10 years of software consulting experience in establishing brand identity, partner alliances, enhancing company visibility, and supporting sales organizations. So for the agenda today, we're just going to touch briefly on exactly what is Pantheon, what we do here, Door3 as well. We're going to talk about Drupal being is it the right solution for you, as well as the main part of the webinar, which is discussing digital assets and digital asset management. So that will be the main focus of our webinar today, and we'll give you a few things to consider in thinking through your digital asset management, as well as go through a few examples as well. So next, I just wanted to give a brief introduction of Pantheon. Pantheon is a website platform for professional developers, and it lets these developers build, launch, and run websites. Our mission is to really power the world's websites. So Pantheon partners with a lot of great development and design agencies. Door3 is one of those agencies, and so I'm really excited that they've joined us here today. And with that, I will turn it over to Garrett and Antonio to take us through the topic of the webinar today. So Tony, I think, great, you're unmuted, so it's all yours.
Yeah, super. So we'll just wait for the slideshow to start again. There it is. So let's get to we saw the agenda already, where we listed out exactly what we're going to get into. Here we go. I think we can move on to the next slide. Great. Super. So Garrett will probably actually speak through these Door3 slides, and I'll speak more to the other slides once we get into digital asset strategy. Garrett, are you with us?
On mute.
Well, nevertheless, I can fill in for Garrett. Hopefully, by the time we figure out the technical malfunctions, how to resolve them, he can join us because he brings a lot to the table in terms of a speaker. So, Door3 was founded in 2002. We're headquartered in New York City. We have offices across the Eastern Seaboard and Europe. As a leading digital design agency, we enable our clients to increase their effectiveness and efficiency by utilizing a world-class experience. So, first and foremost, we are a business solutions company. So we work with companies, we analyze their business needs, and we present options. I am responsible for the Drupal part of our business. However, it's not all Door3 does, but what we'll see later as we progress through the slides is that Drupal is really the platform of choice for maintainable websites that deal with content, and we'll get into those reasons specifically as we go on through. Can we advance the next slide, please? So door 3, why are we called door 3? What is door 3? So there are 3 different kinds of shops that exist in our experience. A lot of times people go with marketing agencies that really have a strong understanding of user experience, creating compelling designs. However, technology in these cases is very secondary. A lot of times the sites get developed, they're not maintainable, they're short-term solutions because all the code is written towards the end of implementing a particular experience, as opposed to really separating the design and the UX layer from the code layer. So at the end, you get a product that really doesn't have as much legs as another type of shop might do. The second type of shop is like an implementation shop, and so these are shops where very development focused. You get your product, but a lot of times they follow the instructions of the client so specifically. They don't think out of the box. They don't know how to work with the client to present better options, better advice that's based on all the experience that a shop might have. It's not as business focused. And the difference is when you go to door 3, we have a fully functional UX department with designers on staff. We have Drupal architects such as myself, and we have business analysts. And so you get a complete business-oriented solution, which we think is an overall better product. Why Drupal? Let me just make a quick check to see if Garrett is unmuted. Are you unmuted? All right. Well, looks like I'll be doing this solo. Why Drupal? Let's move on to the next slide, please. Can we advance to the next slide, please? Okay, great. So I'm not going to go over to each of these points. Ultimately, the fact that you're attending this webinar today speaks to the fact that you've already seen the value of Drupal. But some of the things that I want to call out in particular out of all these lists are Drupal excels at localization and the translation of content. It also specializes, or rather it's very, very effective at specialized workflows, such as getting multiple approvals along the way of the creation of content, as well as the scheduled publishing and unpublishing of content. There's many, many other reasons, including the fact that there are many support options out there, in particular hosting support, like the fine folks at Pantheon, that can really take a lot of the hosting level concerns that a business might have and put it in the hands of the experts, so that you can focus on your business solution, focus on the quality of the application code, and not worry about the infrastructure. So let's move on. So let's assume now that Drupal is the choice for your website. Let's talk about digital assets within Drupal. So when we talk about digital assets in Drupal, there's a few different types of files that we're talking about. We have videos, and those can be streaming, or they can be live cast, or rather, in some cases, the video is pre-recorded and then it's available via streaming. In other cases, it's being delivered live as it happens. We also have images on display. We have other type of formats that you can read online that aren't images, such as SVG and PDF. And lastly, we have just, in general, assets that you can download. So you don't actually view them online. They could be PowerPoint files or whatnot, but they are simply just downloaded. They're archived and they're available for download through your website. Let's advance, please. So we've talked about what kind of assets we have within Drupal. Let's talk about how to optimize them. So the main thing that we want to get into today is that even before we get into advanced support for digital assets. We want to make sure that the Drupal site is optimized for maximum performance, even before the even before we get into the fancy stuff like CDNs and S3s and streaming file wrappers. The first thing we want to do, we want to set up a Drupal site for caching. The second thing we want to do is we want to find all the graphics get loaded constantly again and again, and we want to reduce the number of HTTP requests. So by using a pixel sprite method where one image actually contains 30 different images that are stitched together like a quilt, we can actually load up one image one time and have it supply all the images for all the background graphics. Next, we have caching. Then we have CSS and JS aggregation. Then we have breakpoints, which basically are points at which the design snaps and changes. So it might look one way for desktop. As you reduce the width of the site, it looks different for a tablet. And finally, for mobile, even smaller. Then we have caching, and as you can see, caching is very important when we're talking about optimizing digital assets and using Drupal in particular. Always explore caching. And to that end, we have different kinds of caching strategies. We don't want to get too into that today because it's not specific to digital assets, but caching is actually something that you want to set up depending on the user. So in some cases, the page is the same for everybody, and so you want to cache that globally. Other cases, the page is going to be different depending on what kind of user role they are. We cache differently there. In some cases, an admin that has the ability to change content doesn't need to see a cached page. The page might be a little slower for them, but they want to see their actions, their content changes live right away. And so we don't enable caching for them. For the end user, they might be delayed in seeing the content change by about a minute, but that's not really a big deal. The important thing is that the page loads up right away, and so we enable caching for them. Lastly, we have image cache, which is a fantastic way to upload one image but have it resized for different sizes throughout the site. And so instead of uploading one big image and then 3 or 4 smaller versions of that image to use, depending on what size the image has to be in a teaser or in a list, you just upload one big image, and Drupal's smart enough to crop it, to snip it, make it the right size throughout your site. And in the event that you want to update the image, you only update it once, and it updates across all the instances, all the different sizes. So image cache is definitely something that you want to employ. Lastly, I like to use YSlow to see how to improve my site delivery and performance. And so one thing that YSlow will do is it might tell you you are asking for too many images. That's solved by the pixel sprites. There's a lot of other examples. Once again, these aren't going to be the focus of our webinar, but these are all terms that you should be familiar with and get your site running as fast as it can, even before turning to external resources. Great. Let's move on to the next slide. So,
can you hear me?
Oh, we have Garrett back. My partner in crime is back.
I finally figured out the audio issues. I severely apologize. So, to Tony's point, we're going to get to the crux of the webinar now and what you need to consider. So we go to the next slide. There are so many things really that you need to consider as you're looking at your digital assets and what you're going to do with. You've got public assets, you've got costs, you've got localization. But what's really important as you go to the next slide is you'll see that you really need to find a path, right? You need to let your business drivers lead the way. You need to look at who your audience is, why do your users come to the site, how do they access the site. These are all really, really important things as you begin to move forward. And Tony, I know you have some really in-depth thoughts on some of those pieces.
Yes, well, I think the previous slide really speaks to the fact that there's so many options out there, it's easy to get confused. There's really just so many ways to proceed, and everyone has a different strategy, a different way to do it. Usually it's related to what that particular person has experience with, because that's what they're comfortable with. However, as was stressed before, we really like to focus on business solutions and what is the best for the business, because that is the point of the website. And so when that happens, when you look at asset delivery through the lens of business, a path really appears. For the who, what, when, why, and how of these business drivers really point, and we'll see later how these business drivers affect into a concrete plan when we get into our examples. But the kind of questions you want to ask are, are there marketing campaigns and contests that are bringing traffic? If that's the case, then you're going to see a huge hit that goes up, and then it's going to be dormant for a while. And so you need to find a asset delivery service that is elastic enough to expand and scale up down. That might be more expensive, but it's needed. Other times, you might have an audience that spans all the way from China to Africa to the U.S. Once again, you need a service that can do some geo IP location, determine where your user is coming from, and then use a subset of their cloud that is optimized for that delivery. And so we're going to see later with these examples how this affects. But these are the things that everyone should be thinking about.
Now, Tony, we also realize that there are quite a few other considerations as we talk about on the next slide. These are things that are just as important, I believe, as the ones that you mentioned before as we're looking to find a path. Some of those around cost and budget, public versus private assets, maintainability, which I know that you're a big fan of, and legal considerations. So when we move to the next slide, you'll be able to see some of those. Can you give me a little more depth on some of that stuff?
Sure. So, for example, if you may not need a CDN that is so optimized for geolocation. If that's the case, perhaps you can use a CDN that's not as expensive. In other times, if there is really no privacy issue with your assets, for example, if you are using videos that are accessible to the public and don't need to have a pricing segment, or they don't have to be purchased in order to be viewed, then we don't have to invest in a video infrastructure that has a payment wall. If it's public for everyone, we could host it on YouTube or Kaltura or a slew of other Vimeo, a slew of free video hosting that is going to drive your business and at the same time make it available from other avenues. The other thing too to consider is that in some cases websites are entirely different from how they look on the desktop version to the mobile version. So a lot of websites look the same, the design just changes to accommodate the screen width. But in other cases, imagine, if you will, a website that teaches you how to hit a ball in baseball or something of that nature. You may use a website to log in and see the full website, but the mobile version of that site may just have videos, and that's it. And that might be a user experience decision they've made because the other aspects of the site are kind of too cumbersome to use on a mobile site. Well, if that's the case, you can make sure that you're only really using an expensive video delivery service on the mobile and not spend it on the desktop site. And lastly, different countries have different legal considerations. Recently, we had an experience where we were using a contest site to collect users' information, and we learned that in Ireland now, Irish citizens, your sites are not allowed to capture Irish citizens' emails and store it on databases that are not on Irish soil. And so that means that if you're using like a cloud-based storage database to make it more available to the public. We need to check where the users are from, and we need to make sure we're not breaking any laws. And so even though that's not in particular a digital asset, it does paint a situation. And so before you go into new markets, make sure so you don't have to do some last minute recoding or some reimplementation costs money, or in the worst case scenario, actually pay a fine for breaking the law. And so those are all the considerations I want to get into.
Good advice. Let's get into some of the examples, Tony, that we talked about before. I think are really pertinent to what we're talking about today. There are a lot of solutions that are available out there to the public, but now that we've chosen Drupal and Pantheon, and that we've determined that's the right way to go. Why is that? Right? I mean, there are a lot of alternatives, as I said. You've got Gluster and NAS. So why is it the right choice? What is it that we need to understand that's important for us to realize that this is the right way to go?
Well, for one thing, when you're talking about solutions like Gluster, NAS, and other things that might be specific to a particular host that is not designed for Drupal, it's just a host that's meant to kind of work for anybody, what you get is a solution that's not as maintainable. So anyone that knows me or seen other webinars that I ended up that I've given usually know that I'm a big proponent of maintainability. And when we talk about maintainability, we want the site to if we hire more Drupal developers to work on it, we need them to be scaled up quickly and scaled down quickly. So if you need 10 developers to come in and do something, you don't, and they stagger in, say one comes in one day, one comes in another day. You don't want to have to explain to them your custom hosting solution, your custom web asset delivery system, because that costs time, it costs money, and so when you're talking, not only that, but Gluster, for example, is very expensive, and so, and in NAS, I saw a system one time where there was a load balancer, 5 web heads, and each of those web heads, and when you say web head, it's kind of a nickname for an Apache LAMP stack. Each of those web heads shared one common drive, and all the assets were in that folder. Now, if a Drupal developer were to walk into that situation and they were unfamiliar with the website, there'd be a significant amount of ramp-up time for that. And also, if you ever chose to upgrade your hosting solution, to someone like Pantheon, then what would happen is you would have to refactor your code. And Drupal as a platform is designed from the beginning to be completely independent of the infrastructure. Drupal has been designed to work with, it doesn't even have to be on MySQL database, it can be on Microsoft Access, it doesn't even have to be on a LAMP stack. There's been work done to have it work on Windows-based servers. And so you don't want to undo that. You don't want to make your site dependent on particular technologies. You want to keep it free. You want to keep it be able to be deployed anywhere, because, and that is going to save money. It's going to make your website have more legs. It's going to be able to advance quicker. And so you always think about the future. Let's move on to some good examples of digital asset management.
Before we do that, Tony, you're really saying it's a point of not to compromise, correct?
That's right. Like the slide says, you've already made the right decision by going with Drupal. You don't want to start undoing all the advantages you get with Drupal.
Great. As you said, let's get into some of the better examples here and start looking at some of the setups, especially from a level 1 perspective. First and foremost, you talk about some of the drivers there. Some of the business drivers. Perhaps you have a light development team. Maybe you are accomplishing most of your tasks with contributed modules and configuration. Perhaps you're not even in a global market. Can you expand on some of those other drivers too?
That's really just it. Imagine a really simple site It's not global. Maybe they're based in Texas. They service only the U.S. and they don't have they don't need, I should say, a lot of custom Drupal work. Drupal does out of the box everything they need it to do. All they want to do is make sure their images load quicker. And so in this kind of scenario, let's see what they might explore in terms of what services to use.
So there are major points I know that you want to focus on in this particular example. You're talking about, you know, entire file folders, super simple setup times, big performance gains. Do you want to go over some of the major points in this type of example?
Sure. Let's advance to the next slide. We'll see some of those points listed right there. And so one thing that we might want to explore with a business like this is a CDN set for origin pull. And so when you're talking CDNs, there's push and there's pull. Push is when you actively decide what files are going to be served from your CDN and make them available to your site, and then you go into your site and then you actively write code that pulls those specific images. That's a lot of work. With Drupal, the Drupal community has a very tried and tested module called CDN, which is appropriate, obviously, and it allows for a pull configuration, and this is really where you want to be. When you do this, Drupal puts all the files that Drupal has in its public directory is configured so that they automatically go to your CDN. And so this is, you enable the module, you put the credentials, you hit submit, and you're in business. You're going to see huge performance gains with no custom development, and you can do this with a light development team. So this is something, and in this case, the CDN service itself doesn't have to be so high-end. It could be one of the cheaper, effective ones because we don't need any of that fancy geolocation.
So there've got to be some considerations as you think about this. What are some of the considerations in this example?
So yes. Well, once again, let's advance the slide, and what we're talking about here is kind of, I mentioned this already, but one thing to consider would be as your business grows and you start to find out you're starting to reach new markets, you might want to use a tool like Wonder Proxy, which allows you to, in essence, masquerade as if you were from another country. So let's say your company seems to be getting a lot of hits from Berlin, of all places. So you can log in using Wonder Proxy, simulate that you're coming in from Berlin, and you can just take a look at your website. Once you start to see issues, then you can choose to maybe explore other options. But for now, this should be fine for the business drivers that we talked about. We can probably go to the next slide.
That's great. As we move to the next slide and the next example, in this case, you know, let's imagine a website that needs a more expensive CDN solution, okay? Because of how many regions it supports globally. Each user visiting the site needs to be serviced by a CDN that is smart enough to detect what region the traffic is coming from, and then decide on the appropriate portion of its cloud network to serve its assets. What are some of the things that we need to look forward to and make sure that we're paying attention to in this sort of scenario?
Well, this is very similar to the level 1, but with these massive collection of files, they only need to be downloaded. They don't need to be viewed online. And so we can explore a different kind of solution for these guys. They might have gigs and gigs of videos. They could have huge databases. Door3's had a company that stored research results for PhD research, and so they have these insanely large databases that, you know, everything from you know, whether a frog likes to jump to engineering results from stress tests, and so they need to be displayed online. So let's not incur the cost of a CDN. Let's use something like a bucket. Amazon AWS offers their S3 bucket service, and in essence, it's just a container. You can throw some files in, and then you can download them from there instead of from your host, which is going to really drive your costs below. If we advance, we can see some other aspects of the level 2 design here. Excellent. So we keep the CDN. It serves all the assets in the public folder. And these are your assets like your aggregated JS file, your aggregated CSS file, common files you need throughout your site just to run it every day. But when you're talking about these downloads, we can use entity file fields. We can configure them to save to the S3 bucket bypassing the public folder. So the CDN never sees them. They go straight to S3. Once again, big performance gains. We have cost control because of the business drivers. And we have, but at the same time, we're supporting the business in an effective way.
So what are some of the considerations that we need to take into account?
Well, there's a few considerations here. So when you're talking about your content administrators, the people that are working on the site, they need a little bit of training. They need to understand when they're using the CMS. They don't need to know code, but they need to know the right form to go to. Where do they go to upload their files that need to be downloaded, and then where do they go for other tasks? And so there's a little bit of training there. The other thing too to keep in mind is that we have more moving parts. Your development team may need to be a bit more experienced than in the level 1. So you might need, a mid-level Drupal person. We're still not getting into any custom code here. We're still just doing contributed Drupal, but nevertheless, you may want someone with a little more experience on your team when you advance to something like this.
Excellent. So now let's get into the last example of a level 3 example and some of the business drivers and what seems to be more of the most complex of the 3.
Okay, great. So in this case, we have global market that needs optimized, regionalized cloud asset delivery by geolocation. So we're talking, a high-end CDN here. In addition, this particular site needs to serve live real-time streaming video to viewers from around the globe. We've had this a few times at Door 3. One time there was a church organization based in Manhattan that wanted to broadcast their services around the world. Their congregation kind of spans all over the world, so they want to make sure that a viewer from New Zealand or wherever the case may be could see something being performed, a mass being performed in Manhattan, and so this is a big technical reach. And lastly, in this particular case, let's just say the client wants all their past streams to be archived and publicly available, and so they're free for all users. What would we recommend for them?
So as you advance forward, some of the major points of this would be, your custom stream wrapper, right? A contributed field stream wrapper, and possibly the CDN being configured to public files and folders via the origin pull. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Certainly. So what we have here is we're getting into field stream wrappers. Now, Drupal uses field stream wrappers out of the box for the public files folder, which we touched on before, that level 1 used exclusively. It's kind of the way Drupal does its files. However, what Drupal 7 introduced was the ability to expand upon that. And so you don't have to use Drupal's files. You can use other things. And in our level 2, we had a field stream wrapper that set up S3. So we have basically 2 different buckets. You can use the standard Drupal or the S3. In this particular setup, we're not using S3, but what we are using is YouTube. So we have a YouTube field stream wrapper, and that means that the files exist on YouTube. They're not on your website, which is great because YouTube is free. There's a couple other things YouTube brings to the table, such as the fact that they're actually available on the YouTube site. So somebody that is searching through YouTube might come across this video without even going to the website, and they can find out about this particular business through YouTube, and then At that point, they go to the website, so it's another avenue. It creates organic growth, and they save money in the process. The other thing, too, that we're talking about here is a custom field stream wrapper. So in this case, we have developers that are creating code. They're no longer using exclusively contributed modules. And so they work with a vendor, and they provide, the vendor gives them some link, and custom code is introduced, and now the livecast is supported. And lastly, they have the CDN to handle all the other types of files that the client might have. So this, you can see now the level of complexity has definitely gone up.
So those are some, as we advance, you can see those are some of the interesting considerations. Are there any others that we should be aware of at this particular point in this example, Tony?
Well, I think here is a point where we can start talking about the nature of Drupal, the community, and what it's all about. So in this case, we're using the CDN module, which has been developed by Drupal enthusiasts in the Drupal community, where we're using the YouTube field stream wrapper, which is something also contributed by community, and now we're finally doing some custom code. At this point, this business may want to consider sharing this code with the Drupal community, and there might be some possible business opportunities for everyone involved, besides the altruistic drive to give back to the community which produced the code that's being used. For example, the vendor that's providing the live cast service may actually attract more business with this module there. So if there is a module that has all this code written already, then many businesses would consider using them as their live cast vendor because they don't have to do any custom code. And if that's the case, perhaps this business could get some help or a reduced rate or co-sponsorship for the custom code on Drupal.org for their custom code. The other thing, too, we touched also on the fact that the YouTube videos are also available on the YouTube site, which, as I mentioned before, is going to drive more traffic, more exposure for the company. And so here we see the real beauty of how the Drupal community actually helps other people, gets help in return, and it may actually expand business for a vendor such as the livecast. Lastly, the main thing we also have to keep in mind here is, since we are in the custom code land, we're talking about a more advanced Drupal team, beyond just configuration. Beyond, this is a high level of complexity in code, and so it's one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about your business drivers, costs, the kind of team you need. So in this case, we need a very savvy Drupal team.
Great. That's a really great example. So let's take a minute and review here as we go forward. You touched on some of these things. I know there are a few more key takeaways that we sort of wanted to review, but one of the key takeaways, as you mentioned, is that digital assets can be found in a multitude of places, that the best practices for Drupal really need to be adhered to. The Drupal sites should not turn into unmaintainable or host-specific asset delivery. The business drivers will really determine the correct strategy, right? The type of assets, the audience, the budget that you have available. It's important that you build a strategy implementation on Drupal core and its contributed modules. And as you just mentioned, some custom code may need to be used for support items. Are there any other takeaways, Tony, before we bring Tamani in to talk about some of his key takeaways from this presentation that you'd like to expand on?
Oh, this actually covers it really well. I just want to take this opportunity to stress caching again. Caching is very important. And later, when this becomes available for download, these are all topics that should be explored. Google search will help. There may be some links at the end of this as well to expand your knowledge. And so I just wish you all the best of luck in your digital asset management, and I hope that some of the points we talked so far will be helpful.
Great. As we move forward, Tamani, I know that there were some key takeaways that you wanted to make sure that folks were aware of during the presentation.
Sure. So thanks, guys, for the great coverage of the topic from top to bottom. I think it's a great starting point for a lot of people to get their feet wet as well as to move into implementation as well. The thing that makes the front-end performance and optimizing your digital assets so challenging is that the landscape is always changing. And when you have firms like Door3 who have the resources to dedicate and make sure that they're always on top of these changes, it can really help. But I think with some reading and some extra logging and just looking into these various tools, you can also try and enhance your skill set and catch up with the trends and make sure that you're getting the best use of your tools and Drupal. The first one that I wanted to cover is Google PageSpeed. This will allow you to get an overview of your front-end performance and how it compares on various devices. Tools.pingdom.com at Pingdom Tools are generally useful as well. So they give you waterfall analysis that you can do on your site and get basically a visual overview of how each page is rendered from the user's perspective. Getting real user metrics is extremely important. We already heard Tony touch on Whiteflow. Another one that you can use to analyze your requests and browser composition of page is using Firebug. My favorite and personal best is definitely Web Page Test. So if you can and have time, you should explore some of these tools. We also have Grunt, which is a task runner, which allows you to automate a lot of these checks. So if you wanted to run through, have Google PageSpeed, have Pingdom and Whiteflow run through your site, you could do this during development. And basically, this will help you catch any regressions or performance drawbacks that you may encounter as well. So once you've got a handle of these and the concepts that Tony and Garrett have talked about, you should definitely look at automating and some of these other tools that are available. It doesn't end there. I think additional reading is extremely important. Over here at Pantheon, one of the things that we emphasize for each one of our members in the customer support department is that they should always understand their information as well as the tools that they're using from top to bottom. One of the most important ones, and throughout the course of the presentation, Tony touched on them, but they are best practices for front-end and web development, which then leads into how you deliver your digital assets. The first one I would definitely say is the Google best practice recommendations. Again, these links will be available in the final presentation. You can also take a look at the Yahoo page rules. These are similar to the best practice recommendations, such as reducing the overhead, minimizing your assets, and the number of HTTP requests, using sprites and things like that. But definitely a must read for any of your front-end developers. And the final one that I generally recommend and we recommend internally is the High Performance Networking book. It's a free book. It's an ebook by Ilya Grigorik, who is a pretty well-known front-end performance analyst. So give these a try and let us know and your feedback from them as well and how they impact and improve your development process. Lastly, I'd also say if, as the people in the Drupal community, you should definitely follow some of the front-end guys who are leading the way in some of these, such as Wim Leers, and we have Jen Lampton, Morten DK, and Chris Drupal. So, if you're also following any of the guys from Door3 like Antonio, I highly recommend. You'll find some pretty good and interesting resources there. On that note, I think I'll be turning it over and we can move forward towards questions.
Yeah,
great.
Thanks very much. Linda, I think we have a few questions in the queue.
Yeah, we do. And just a reminder for everybody else on the line, if you have questions, please submit them through the question chat window in the webinar. But a couple questions we have. First of all, what modules do you recommend for attaching existing videos and images to my various content nodes in Drupal? Probably a question for you, Tony.
Okay, so yeah, certainly. This is one of my favorite modules, so I'm glad this came up. Using the media module is really fantastic. So imagine, if you will, you upload a whole bunch of files, and now you have this whole library of videos and nodes. Say you create a new piece of content, like say an article. The media module allows you to go through your site's entire list of videos, for example, choose the right one, embeds it in the page without having to re-upload the video or without having to go through multiple pages. So it's extremely powerful. You can do this for images, and you can do this for any kind of file, and it doesn't need to be within Drupal's public files folder. It could be an S3 video, it could be a YouTube video, it could even be a live cast. So it's abstract enough to be able to handle something that doesn't even really exist yet, like if there's a scheduled live cast in the future. You can actually incorporate it into your system, your Drupal CMS's catalog of videos, and you can assign it to any type of node that you want. One thing I want to add, though, is that there's currently a new version of the media module out, a new development track. So it's like a version 2. Version 1 is not receiving any more active updates, and there is a migration path from 1 to 2. But if you're starting from scratch, you might as well go with 2. It is not officially stable yet. However, we've been using it for over a year, or close to a year, I should say, at Door 3, and we have no issues with it. So we recommend the Media 2 version to start off with.
So we have another question. So if I have multiple environments like dev, test, and staging, well, how will this impact how I do my storage, or will it impact it at all?
This is an excellent question. And so let's take the level 1 example just because it's easy to talk about. So we have a CDN. Clearly, they need to be separate CDNs. For example, if you are doing some kind of content change on staging and you update the image, you know, if you're sharing the same CDN service for staging and for production, you're going to update the image for production. So the main thing you want to be concerned about when you're dealing with multiple tiers on a CDN, like bills, if you will, from dev to stage and production, is you need to have a standardized URL, because CDNs really work with domain, and so you want to make sure that you have a standardized domain. For example, if your website's called example.com, you want your stage type to be stage.example.com, and you want your local development to be dev.example.com. And so by keeping this consistent, you can do a local host file change for your local dev environment if you have one, and you can basically, you may want to get into your host file to kind of standardize your development workflow, but certainly, and it's not going to drive the cost that much, because when you're talking about your dev, you're talking about your staging site, you're not going to get a lot of traffic there, so you're not going to get any extra real costs if your CDN costs are based on page views. And so definitely the main takeaway here is you will need 3 separate CDN instances for your 3 separate builds.
Great, thank you. Another question is, have you ever written code for a custom field wrapper for a live cast?
Yes, we have actually, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I actually looked at some contributed field stream wrappers that were written by some very talented people in the community to look at how they set that up. And so I looked at, like the example I mentioned earlier, the YouTube wrapper. Well, there's also the S3 wrapper, but the YouTube one is more relevant because it's video. We looked at it, we looked at how the code was written, and then we made a new one that handled an Akamai video streaming service. So the Akamai is one of the high-end players in digital asset delivery, and we were able to put together a custom stream wrapper that was able to support that. And good thing too, because the file entity module enables us to actually utilize the entire entity API for files, we were able to create view modes for this entity. And view modes are, for those that don't know, most of you probably do, are you can have a particular entity appear one way, appear another way. So if you wanted the video to appear as a teaser, it would be a small thumbnail with a play symbol kind of overcast on it, the universal identifier for a thumb that could be played. And we had another view mode of the same exact file entity where it was larger and it was an actual playable video. So by utilizing file entity, by utilizing a custom stream wrapper, we were able to create this functionality and do it in a very, very maintainable way. And of course, that's always what we're striving for when we're talking about Drupal.
Great, thanks. And another question, can files added through the S3 module be made available as entities?
This is a good question, and so the answer is yes. And so when we're talking about entities, that is a contributed module. It doesn't come with core. Core does treat files like entities, and let me just talk about entities for a little bit. Everything in Drupal is an entity in terms of you got your users, your nodes, your taxonomy, and your files. And so by making things entities, they immediately become eligible for all the functionality that the entity API ships with, which one of the major features is we talked about view modes, and there's also fields. And so you can add fields to your files. And so if we have once we upload a file into the system and we designate it to exist in an S3 bucket, even though it's not within Drupal per se, it's remote in some faraway cloud, as far as Drupal's concerned, that file is in Drupal, even though it's not, which makes it much easier to do things like we talked about the media module, placing images right on your article. So you might have a video hosted in S3, but you want to plop it into a local article that's being served through your local Drupal site. No problem. You can find it, place it, and then format a view mode and make it appear just the way you want it to.
Great, thanks, Tony. Just wanted to say thank you to Antonio and Tamani and Garrett for joining us for the webinar today. For more information, you could see, sorry, the slide I'm just showing now. If you have any questions and want to reach out, emails and contact information is listed here. And again, as a reminder, the recording of the webinar will be posted on our website later today. So I just want to say thank you for everyone joining us today, and thanks to Door3 and Pantha and Tamani, of course, and I hope everybody has a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.